Okay, so I just want to say my name's Dan Waters. I have two residential properties here on the north side of Valpo. I'm beside Flint Lake. I practice permaculture on these two small plots of land. And also I have a larger garden plot at Lais Duffy's house. She's another permaculture founding mother of Northwest Indiana Permaculture. And so I took my PDC, my permaculture design course in 2017 with Rhonda Baird. And at some point over the course of taking these classes with her, she said, hey, there's a woman that was in one of my earlier classes. I think she lives close to Valparaiso, Indiana. I need to hook you guys up. You're like, oh, this woman is really a mover and a shaker. And this woman was Christine Maloney. And so my wife and I called her, invited her to dinner. And I believe that she came that first time with her friend Lais Duffy, who had taken the permaculture design course with her. And of course, we hit it off. We had a lot of things in common. And Lais and Christine said that they would like to start a permaculture meetup group. At the time, I had never even heard of a meetup group, but anyway, they started it up. We started organizing learning experiences, hands-on workshops, and little by little more people started coming. Michael Foos and Maureen started coming early on and hosted several events at their place. We were all hosting events at our houses, depending on what the event was. And we did things like tap maple trees and make maple syrup. We harvested black walnuts and pressed them for oil. At my house, we did shiitake mushroom inoculation on some oak logs. We built an outdoor adobe oven. We did some sheet mulching. So anyway, we were doing that kind of stuff. And then along came COVID. And we pretty much shut down for the last couple of years. We haven't had a whole lot going on. And this is kind of Northwest Indiana permaculture rising from the ashes on a new platform called Zoom. So yeah, thank you, Kathy. And anyway, without saying much more, Christine, please do your thing.
Wow, Dan, thank you so much. That was wonderful. It was neat to be reminded of our history. I tend to forget that. So that's really great. Thank you for sharing that. So yeah, we are here today courtesy of the Meetup platform, which is being supported by the SARE, Sustainable Agriculture Research Education Granting, as well as the Co-Thrive Time Bank. So it's our three organizations that are working together, which will, I know, definitely make Kathy Sippel's heart very happy, because this is social permaculture in action. And I love permaculture, like Dan mentioned. We met in 2017, but prior to that, Elise and I had taken our permaculture design course together in 2016 and took our first course together then. We took an advanced permaculture design course in 2017. And then since then, I have also taken an educator training course as well. Education is definitely my passion, as is land-based permaculture. I love getting my hands dirty, but I also love teaching. So these are two of my passions. So I'm really grateful to everyone being here today. What a wonderful group we have. I'd like to get started just by asking, oh no, this is not going to happen now, is it? Why is my screen not advancing? Oh, there we go. What are your concerns about the future? If you just think about that for a moment and think about, what have you been listening to on the news? What sort of information are you getting about what's happening in the world as far as our environment? Yes, Kathy threw out their climate change. Some things that other people talk about would be pollution. The garbage patches that have been located in the North Atlantic Ocean and in the Gulf Coast. Another one might be suburban sprawl, which is huge. Houses taking over, cookie cutter homes with not much interest, devoid of much landscaping, much less the trees that used to be there. Most of the Midwest used to be forested, and now it's all tract housing. Hunger is definitely an issue. Many people going hungry, even in our local communities here. There's so many food banks, especially during COVID, that really provided essential food for people when they couldn't otherwise get it. But globally as well, nutrition is an issue. The industrial food complex, the way that it poisons our soil with pesticides and herbicides, monocropping, no biodiversity. Knowing that we're past peak oil, we have already extracted the abundance of oil that was under the ground. We are now past peak oil and definitely need to start refocusing on solar, wind, and water for our energy. But going through that energy descent issue is definitely something that's probably weighing on people's minds. Sea level rise is another issue as island communities and native tribes are losing their island habitats and their cultures. That's also a huge issue. Climate change, like Kathy mentioned in the chat box, if you're living here in the Midwest, then the huge rain events that we've been having and then the huge droughts during the summer definitely are impacting the way we can grow our food. The amount of food waste that occurs just because we have too much of it, so much easy access. We're growing so little of it and we don't know how to repurpose our food using leftovers or distributing the surplus in the community that needs it. And population increase. So these are just a few of the concerns that people might have about going into the future and how are we raising the next generations and what sort of world are we leaving them. And if that tends to leave you feeling like this, then you're in the right spot. We're here to talk about permaculture, what it is and the various ways that we can implement it in our lives. But I think we first need to define what it is. And permaculture comes from these two words, permanent and agriculture. And it was started back in 1978 by Bill Mollison and David Holmgren. They were working together. I believe David Holmgren was writing his thesis or his doctorate, but he was doing some advanced education work and he paired up with Bill Mollison, who also happened to be studying the agricultural uses in Australia. So this concept of permaculture was based in Australia, but it heavily relied on the native culture. So the Aborigine people that were in Australia. And there's this really great book called Dark Emu. And it is a history book about Australia and mentions how rich and deep the soil was in Australia before colonists got there. And this is very similar to the European colonists that came to North America. And they said how the forests were beautiful and park-like and the soils were deep and rich and so abundant, provided so abundantly for the native cultures that were there. And in 1978, when this book was written, by then, so much of the Australian soil was depleted. They were experiencing droughts and lots of environmental calamities were occurring. And so Bill Mollison and David Holmgren came up with this concept of permaculture, which is actually a combination of indigenous knowledge and modern science. And we'll talk a little bit about that more later. But one thing that has come from our understanding of permaculture as it was presented by Bill Mollison and David Holmgren is that not only is it agriculture based, but it needs to be culturally based. This is not just about our soils. This is also about how this is affecting us as humans and our longevity into the future as a culture. To define permaculture, though, we'll go a little bit deeper here and say that permaculture is a holistic design system. And this sounds super fancy, but we'll break this down into the three words, holistic. If you've ever gone to a holistic doctor, holistic natural practitioner, you know that they're not just treating your body. You don't go in and say, I've got this problem with my elbow, or I have a problem with my earlobe. No, you go to a holistic doctor and they treat you mind, body, and soul. They ask about your childhood. They ask about your mental health. They ask about the connections between the supplements that you're taking and the food that you're eating. They are looking at you as a whole person. So when we are implementing permaculture, we are looking at it holistically. We're looking at life holistically. So we're looking at everything. To design something means to be actively engaged in its creation and implementation. So it's a process that we're involved in, that we understand from start to finish. And then a system is where you have all the components working together symbiotically. So to me, this is so beautiful to think about permaculture being a holistic design system that we can be involved in, that looks at everything combined and synergistically. This system helps to provide resilience, so the ability to bounce back from upheaval. So whether this is economic or environmental upheaval, whether it's political or maybe even personal upheaval, permaculture helps to provide resilience during times of upheaval. It also encourages us to regenerate the soil and regenerate our communities. Over the past several decades, we have definitely become much more segmented, more cocooned, if you will, so that we feel like we're individuals. We kind of have this idea for independence, that we as a person can do it all, and we've segregated ourselves from the community at large. So permaculture helps us to redesign that and reintegrate ourselves into that sense of community. And we do this by looking at and imitating the patterns in nature. We know that almost every other community in nature, whether it's a forest community or a group of animals that live together in community, that there are patterns in those communities that we can look at and learn from. So all we need to do is look at nature and look at those patterns and see how we can implement them in our own communities. We do this by blending the indigenous knowledge and modern science. We do know now that much of what indigenous communities were doing was based on science. Maybe they didn't use the term like we do now, but their levels of observation were immaculate, and they understood connections much more than even our current science does, where our science delves very deeply into one particular topic, but doesn't always look at parallel connections to things. Then the last point for permaculture is that it must be for the benefit of all. Permaculture cannot just be for the benefit of the human species. We are not the only creature on this planet that depends on the water and the soil and air quality. Permaculture, as we're developing it and designing it, is for the benefit of all. Now, it's based on these three ethics, and I want you to remember this core image, because this core image will be coming up later as well. But the three main ethics of permaculture are earth care, people care, and fair share. And as we've already mentioned, earth care is taking care of the soil, the air, plants and water, everything physical around us, everything that we rely on to sustain life. People care is taking care of ourselves so that we can become part of a community. We do need to practice self-care. It's also taking care of our kin. And whether this is people who are biologically related to us, or the kindred spirits that we pull into our sphere and our circle, and then the larger community. So maybe it's the permaculture community, maybe it's your local city or state, maybe it is the larger world community. Really depends on how broad of a scope you want to take with that. And then fair share, and I love the icon for the fair share because it's really nice to have pie, isn't it? I don't know what your favorite is, but I don't know if I have a favorite. I like them all. Anyway, I like pie. But to have a piece of pie should be enough. You don't need to eat the whole pie. So when we look at this icon, this reminds us that we can share the abundance. We should limit our consumption, reducing waste so that we can redistribute the surplus that we have. So thinking about that previous slide where we were talking about the food waste and seeing that garbage can full of the food, this is one way that we can practice fair share. Now, over the course of the years since permaculture has been a thing, fair share has kind of been modified. So you have to remember that permaculture is a human construct. It's something that we humans have created, and it's primarily white culture that is needing to rely on permaculture. And the reason I say that is because Native communities still practice this. Many in the people of culture, Black communities, have always practiced permaculture. They've always taken care of the earth through their gardening techniques, and they take care of people. It seems like it's primarily a Western culture thing to segregate ourselves from it. So this last permaculture ethic, fair share, has kind of also morphed into future care. So thinking about how are our actions affecting the future? And how can we transition away from the global food systems that we have, bringing food in from South America because it's not in season here. Anyone go to the grocery store and see the fresh raspberries and the fresh asparagus that's on sale right now? That is not local. Those need to be trucked in. There's a lot of fuel that's involved with transporting those things across the globe. And if we can think about future care, instead of importing a lot of fresh produce, we should be growing our own and learning how to put up our own. So having a larder, having a pantry with things that we have harvested when it's appropriate to harvest those things, and focusing more on our local economies. One thing that we were doing in our permaculture group before COVID hit was that we had been doing a food swap, which was really fun. It was a great way to support social permaculture, as well as this concept of fair share and future care. So people would grow things in their yard, or they would forage things, and then we would bring them to a food swap and you would swap. So somebody might make spent grain tortillas and swap them for some homemade maple syrup or some backyard raised hen's eggs. So it was a really great way to meet other people, but also to share in the abundance and decrease our gas consumption, getting to and from places, and connecting with local folks who are like-minded. So these are the three ethics of permaculture. So here's a photo of David Holmgren. He and Bill Mollison were the two that wrote the first permaculture book. Bill decided that he wanted to do more of the education part of permaculture, and he went around the world talking to various organizations and individuals about permaculture. So he was more of the mouthpiece for permaculture. And David Holmgren did much more to delve more deeply into the principles of permaculture and do more land-based permaculture. And he wrote this book, Pathways and Principles and Pathways Beyond Sustainability. And I love how he defines the permaculture principles as thinking tools for creatively redesigning our environment and our behavior in a world for less energy. We do know that we are in energy descent. If you've looked at your energy bill recently, it tends to keep going up. So how do we plan for that? That's part of this design part of permaculture. So here are the 12 principles that he lays out, and you can see that the ethics are at the core of them. So we always keep the core of those three ethics, earth care, people care, and fair share, at the core of all of our decision making and all of our actions and all of our behaviors. And we'll start with number 1, which is at the 1 o'clock. And I'm going to go through them briefly. You could read the entire book if you wanted to. It's a wonderful book, kind of a heavy, deep read. So there's a lot more you could learn about this if you want to get more intellectual about permaculture. But the first one is observe and interact. And that made it into my definition of what permaculture is. So observing and interacting with nature is simply watching. If you have a new property or you've moved into a new place, take a year to just sit and watch what's happening in your yard or on your property. Maybe find a sit spot. And I love this photo because I love the idea of us just being in childlike wonderment of what we see around us, just looking, paying attention, maybe moving some, if you're in your backyard, moving a pile of branches to see if that affects where the birds land. Maybe you have a bird habitat that you didn't know about. But observing and interacting with our surroundings is the very first permaculture principle. So before you go and install a garden in your backyard, find out, where is the water running? Do you have downspouts that tend to puddle in a particular area? Where does the wind move? Where do you notice noises coming from? If you're near a busy street, is there a way that you can maybe put up a hedge to block some of that sound? Watching where the insects and the wildlife are traveling through your property, and then also paying attention to where the sun is. And those sun shadows and those sunny spots will definitely indicate where you should put a garden and maybe where you need to think about putting shade-loving plants. So observe and interact, our first permaculture principle. The second one is catch and store energy. This can be done in a variety of ways. I know Mike and Maureen have IBC totes, and an IBC tote stands for International Bulk Container. And these are used for shipping liquids. The IBC totes that I had fuel in them. And sometimes they might have something just like baby food or coconut oil in them. But they move large quantities of liquid from place to place, and you can often get them from farmers or you can find them online. But this is one way of catching and storing energy. Water is a form of energy. You can also do this through your garden harvest. Your plants are capturing the sun's energy. They're capturing the nutrients from the soil. They store that energy in their roots and in their flowers, in their leaves. And when we capture that through harvesting them and then either dehydrating or freezing or canning, we are capturing and storing that energy. So like when I talked about future care and reducing the amount of mileage that our food has to travel, this is one way that we can capture and store energy and hold on to it for future use. I love this photo. To me, it's just a way of looking at nature and seeing how nature, how we can imitate nature. So holding on to that harvest. So whether it's collecting black walnuts like we did at Elise's house and learning how to process them, we're collecting that energy that the trees created and using it for later use. And then also capturing our community's energy. So the organization that Elise happened to mention that's starting in Highland and moving over into Munster, that is a form of energy. It's a social energy, and we can capture that. Just like on this video here, we're capturing this energy that we're creating through our videos and our recordings and our meetings, and then we can store this and use it later. The third principle is obtain a yield. Obviously, we want what we're doing, the energy that we're expending, to give us something in return. So the image of the radish here is, it shows us that when we plant a seed, whether it's for a plant or planting seeds of knowledge in the next generation or planting seeds of love in our community, we hope that that comes back to us. So this here is one of the 1 year in my garden. And I was just so full of gratitude when I happened to come in and set everything on the kitchen table. And I was like, wow, I planted these seeds, but I didn't grow them, but they gave their gifts to me. And I was so very grateful for this yield that I had obtained from my garden with a little bit of effort, a little bit of love. But other yields that we can get, maybe you have backyard chickens. I know Mike and Maureen have backyard chickens, and not only do they provide them with eggs, they did have to cull one of their roosters because it was not a very nice rooster. Sometimes we have to do that for the harmony in the group, and that also provided them with meat. As the chickens are in the yard, the chickens are pooping, they're shedding feathers. Those are essential nutrients that we can then compost and return to the garden in other areas. One of the other yields that chickens give us is entertainment. Like, how fun are chickens? They're so sweet and wonderful to watch. They're so entertaining. So that is a gift that they give us also. So when we're designing for our backyards or other places, that is one of their gifts. That's a yield that we can get from them, is just pure, simple joy. Some of the other gifts that they give us are with their foraging techniques, the way they scratch up the soil, eat the insects that might be damaging our plants. They're helping to till the soil a little bit, remove insects that we don't want in our garden. So there are multiple yields. And so I just love this graphic of the permaculture chicken. It makes me giggle. Our fourth principle is apply self-regulation and accept feedback. So when we are thinking about when we are implementing a particular technique, whether it's putting in IBC totes in our backyard or on our gutters, or where we're putting in a garden, we think about those actions. We also need to look at the reactions. If I put an IBC tote in a place where it's too shaded, maybe there's going to be algae that grows in the IBC tote. My modification then is that maybe I need to move my IBC tote. If I put in a garden, or if I plant a tree and I notice that it's not doing very well, over a couple of years, it's not growing as well as I thought, that reaction from that tree infers that a modification needs to happen. Maybe that tree needs to be moved to full sun. If you've ever planted an oak sapling, oaks need full sun. They cannot grow in a forest. They typically grow in a savanna. And so if you try to plant an oak tree in a forest or in your backyard that's already shaded, it's not going to grow very well. So what you need to do then, noticing that reaction of stunted growth, you should modify its habitat. So that's that loop of applying self-regulation and accepting feedback. And who's really great at accepting feedback? Our puppies, aren't they? Mike and Maureen, I'm sure you've noticed this. Anybody else who has dogs, they are really great at applying self-regulation and accepting feedback. And I think that that's just a great example for us as humans to understand that modifying our behavior will get us the results that we need, but we need to be paying attention to those reactions that we are noticing in nature. Principle number 5, using and valuing renewable resources. And I love the fact that the horse is the logo for this, this particular principle, because horses are renewable resources. We are as well. We feed ourselves, we expend our energy, maybe we go jogging, maybe we're working out in the garden, whatever it is that we do in our daily lives, and then we feed ourselves, and then we go out and we work again. We are a renewable resource, as are horses. So you feed a horse, your horse does some work for you, it poops that, what are they called? Road apples? Yeah, road apples. So those road apples can be collected. That can be used as manure. They can perform functions for us on our farms. But soil is also another renewable resource. If we're treating it properly, our current industrial food complex is definitely not using soil as a renewable resource. They are using it as a one-time resource, or trying to get as much out of it as they can. That productivity is their end goal, not using it as a renewable resource. So when we think about our gardens, putting mulch on our garden, putting compost on our gardens, even using urine, our own urine from our bodies is one of the best ways to put nutrients in the soil to make it a renewable resource. And Indigenous people knew this. They knew that they had to treat the soil well in order for it to be able to give its gifts to us. We had to give our gifts to it as well. And then also thinking about plants as renewable resources. So 2 plants that are renewable are bamboo and comfrey. Comfrey is a really great chop and drop sort of plant. It will keep growing leaves, and you can keep cutting those leaves and putting them on top of the soil, and it will just continue giving its gifts to us. Bamboo, we know, is a really great renewable resource. It does need to be planted in moderation, though, depending on where you're planting it, just because it can become invasive. But learning how to use and value these renewable resources is part of our permaculture implementation. producing no waste. I think I love this principle best just because I am so fanatic about composting, and I even teach composting classes. Worms, I think, would probably be my best friend if I didn't know humans. I truly enjoy what they do and how they take our waste and turn it into something so rich and beneficial for the soil, and then how that gives back to the plants, and then those plants give their gifts back to us, and then we just kind of continue this cycle. Other ways of producing no waste are, simple things like using reusable grocery bags, using products that are not packaged in plastic, and then also purchasing products that are made from recycled products. So, being able to buy paper products like toilet paper or paper napkins that are made from recycled paper products helps to close that loop. And that's an important key. I'm not in support of using disposable products, but if I know that I'm helping to close the loop, I will purchase toilet paper and paper towels that are made from recycled paper, because we need to support those companies that are trying to help humanity do what we can to produce no waste. And, you think about all of the R's: recycle, reduce, reuse, and then the other ones: rethink, refuse, by refusing a straw at the restaurant, or refusing disposable utensils when you are, if you have to go through a fast food restaurant, refusing certain things. Regifting. I love this idea, of passing along things that maybe don't suit you well. Repairing is really important. I don't know how many of us know how to darn a sock anymore, but our grandparents definitely knew how to repair things really well. The seventh principle is designing from patterns to details. And in permaculture, we look at these zones, and zone 0 is the home. It's your home base. So whether it's an apartment, whether it's your home in the suburbs, whether it's your farmhouse out in the country, zone 0 is where you start from. If you think about this from a social permaculture perspective, zone 0 is yourself. And then going outwards are your zones 1, which is your closest proximity. Zone 2 is a little bit further out. Zone 3 further out. Zone 4 or 5 might be wilderness or things that are unknown. Typically, when I have more time, I like to ask people to close their eyes and imagine that they had a blank living room. You have nothing in this living room. What is the first thing that you put in it? And a lot of times people will say, I put a couch in there, or I'll put some lighting. Maybe some people will say, I'll put a piano in there. Well, that pattern for a living room is that we want our living rooms to be comfortable. That's why you would put a chair in your living room. Maybe you want some sort of entertainment, so maybe a television or a piano. So that pattern of what is a living room is the main design function. And then you design down to the details. Then maybe you put a specific pillow on the couch, or maybe then you pick the carpet that you put on the floor. But you don't do it the opposite way. You don't start with a pillow and then design your whole living room around that, right? So we look at the patterns first. We look at what are the goals if you're designing your backyard, if you want to do gardening, if you are doing a community garden. You think about your goals and the patterns first, and then you design down to the details later. The eighth principle is integrating rather than segregating. And this, I think, is such a neat icon because it looks like a flower with little circles around the perimeter. But if you look at it a little more closely, those circles are actually heads, and the flower petals are the people's bodies. Take a second and look at that. So where the two petals are closest on the left and right hand side is actually the body of the person. And these are people who are connecting. They are being integrated into a whole. They're not being segregated. So if we think about this in terms of relationships, this would be having your grandchildren living with the grandparents. So the intergenerational aspect of living. This might also be gender. Allowing the father to do more of the parenting, and maybe the woman goes off to work. That's integrating gender equality. and balances. And then culturally as well, incorporating all the various ways that we humans have learned how to survive on this planet, how we have learned to live cohesively with each other, even if we do have differences. Number 9, using slow and steady solutions. So like I mentioned before, taking a year to, when we're talking about to observe and interact, I feel like this is pretty connected as far as slow and steady solutions. When we are thinking about designing a new space, whether that is for a community or a plot of land, slow and steady solutions is the answer. And the snail is the icon for this, this particular principle. But I do love this graphic, that your speed doesn't matter, forward is forward. And this kind of comes from a Chinese saying along the same lines as, you know, it doesn't matter how slow you're going, just keep putting one foot in front of the other. We can't make all the permaculture changes all at once. You know, any habit, when you try to learn a new habit, they say it always takes 21 days or 3 weeks to learn a new habit. So slow and steady solutions is the way to make progress. If we try to do too much all at once, typically things tend to fail because we just can't keep up with too many new things all at once. Principle number 10 is to use and value diversity. And if we look at the way a food forest is created, it is looking at and imitating how nature grows. So a food forest has 7 layers typically. You have the canopy layer, which are the tallest trees. So your tulip poplars, your oaks, black walnuts. Your second layer is going to be your understory trees. So this might be apple trees, serviceberry trees, red buds. So these are smaller trees that are in the underneath the canopy layer. You've got vines that typically grow up the trees. So grapevine, your caning plants like raspberries and blackberries, that's part of that vining layer. Below that, you have shrubs. So this could be your hazelnuts, gooseberries, Nanking cherry bushes, something in that lower layer that's maybe 6 to 8 feet tall. Then you have an herbaceous layer, which are the plants that are on the ground that maybe come to 2 to 4 feet tall. And these are going to be like your potato plants. I'm going to take back potato plants because I'll get to that in a second. But your tomato plants, your pepper plants, wildflowers that are helping to feed the pollinators. Next, you would have your ground cover. So this could be strawberries, wintergreen, what are some other vining ground cover plants? Thyme is a really great ground cover. It grows slowly. And then your root crops. So this is where the potatoes come in. Those things that grow in the ground themselves. So potatoes, carrots, rutabaga, beets. So you've got these multiple layers in the forest, in our food forest, and those mimic what are growing in a regular forest. But we're designing it to be beneficial for us humans as well as for the natural flora and fauna that is in the area as well. Principle 11 is using the edges and valuing the marginal. And I'm going to be honest, this principle took me a little while to, wrap my head around. I didn't really get it. But when I started to look at some places in habitats where there are edges, the estuaries, especially, along Lake Michigan, being here in the Midwest, especially near the Indiana dunes, there are lots of places where the land meets the water and the water doesn't flow straight into Lake Michigan. There are these areas of marshland, and the Great Marsh up in Beverly Shores is a really great example of that marshy area where there's an edge between the water and the land. And this is an estuary on one of the coasts. So this is where one of the rivers meets the Atlantic Ocean. And you can see the tidal areas, and you can see some of the areas where there's some land. And there is so much edge between where the water and the land meets. And it provides a habitat that is very rich and very abundant with the various types of animals that use both land and water, or that are migrating from wetter areas to drier areas, or even that like brackish water. So those maybe sharks, and so there are some fish also that like the area of the water that's partly saline from the ocean, but it also has some fresh water components to it. So using and valuing these areas that are at the edges, and this also happens in our backyards too, where we, your property butts up against your neighbor's property. How can you develop that? How can you develop that sense of community amongst your neighbors? You can also design this into your garden with a keyhole garden. And this helps to create more edges in your garden and gives you more space for various types of plantings. So not only is this something that happens out in nature, it's something that we can design into our gardens to create more workspace, more abundance in our gardens intentionally. And there's a great book called Retro Suburbia. And it was written specifically for the suburbs and how to implement permaculture. And if you think about it, the suburbs are a type of edge. They actually have two edges. One edge is against the urban areas, and the other edge is against the farmland area. So they actually have two edges. And when you have more edges, you have more abundance. So in the suburbs area, they have this really unique opportunity to glean from the urban areas as well as to glean from farmland areas. So it's a really great book if you are in a suburban area and how to apply permaculture to those areas that many people tend to shy away from, thinking that permaculture can only be applied if you've got 20 acres and that's the only way permaculture happens, but it doesn't. We can implement permaculture in many different ways. And the last permaculture principle is to creatively respond to change. And we do know that change is happening. We call it climate weirding. Some people are uncomfortable with the phrase climate change, but we know that things are just getting a little weird, aren't they? Here in the Midwest, we've had springs that are incredibly wet. We've had 100-year rains. We've also had 500-year rains. And then we've had long periods of drought during the summer. So we know that change is happening. And one thing that we can do is to practice Aikido. Has anyone ever done any martial arts before? Aikido, I saw somebody raise their hand. Aikido practices flipping things on their head. So you can see in this photo here, the attacker has thrown a punch, has tried to attack. There's been some energy that was put towards her. She used that energy to her advantage. She flipped that energy and then was able to flip him as well. So in Aikido, they take the energy that's coming at them, they flip it and use it to their advantage. And that's why we say that the problem is the solution. We have climate weirding happening. How can we use it to our advantage? How can we use it as a solution? There are many different ways we can do that. You'll find all sorts of ideas on the internet, but this is one of our principles. It's flipping what's happening to us to our advantage so that we can continue surviving. And we know that the growing zones are slowly moving northward. I think what I heard is that it is marching 20 miles north every year. So if you think about that, within the next, let's see, Indianapolis is about 150 miles south of us from up here in Valparaiso. So do some simple math. So in the next 7 to 9 years or so, we could be in a different planting zone up here, which is pretty crazy to think about. So how do we modify, how do we Aikido this? How do we flip it so that the problem becomes a solution? One of the other things that we can do, so if you look at this graphic, you can see that the permaculture ethics are at the very center. Outstanding from outside of that are the 12 permaculture principles, and spiraling out from that is this flower, the 7 petals of the flower. in the various ways that we can implement the ethics and the principles in these various areas of our life. So this is where we apply them. I'm not going to go through this. I could do like a whole presentation on this. But everything from the yellow petal up at the top, which refers to the buildings. So all of our built environment, the homes that we live in, the buildings that we go to for work, tools and technology. You know, are you riding a bike? Are you using hand tools? Do you have solar panels on your roof? You know, all the various tools and technology that we have. Education and culture. This could be learning, you know, self-taught learning. This could be homeschooling, Montessori or Waldorf education, reinvigorating our culture. The health and spiritual well-being, connecting to each other, practicing mindfulness, the finances and economics. You know, if you're involved in a time bank, is a really great way to flip the current problems that we have with our economy and wealth accumulation by the top 1%. Land tenure and community governance refers to how are we holding land into the future. Currently, right now, almost all of our land is privately owned and very little of it is held in common for everybody to use. I happen to work for a land trust where we do hold property, and many of our state and national parks hold property for future generations. So that is part of land tenure and community governance. Land and nature stewardship. This is what most people think of when they think of permaculture, is like, how am I using my soil? How am I growing food? And this is a very important component to permaculture. You can see it is much more than just organic gardening. Although some people do say that organic gardening is the gateway drug into permaculture. And I think I might agree, because oftentimes when you're looking for organic gardening, you will stumble upon permaculture, and that opens up this entire world of connectivity and community and resilience. One of the last things that I want to talk about are the 8 forms of capital. And there are 8 different ways where we can be wealthy. It is not just all about financial wealth. There are many other ways where we can collect that energy, that social capital as well. It's just one of them we're going to talk about. So social capital is about our connections. So these are the favors that we do for each other, or the connections that we have. Like Kathy is really great at connecting people. Social permaculture is definitely her forte. And so this is about how we are in relationship with other people. The Amish practice this very well. They will often build into their interactions and their society this idea of indebtedness, and they help each other because one person is indebted to another person, and that's why they can do barn raisings. You know, they all work together as community because they have very strong social capital. Material capital is the stuff that we have around us. Hoarders have a lot of material capital. Even if it's not all valuable, they have a lot of material capital. It's their stuff that they have. But it's also just anything in the physical realm. And we can be very wealthy in material capital. I'm kind of jealous of people who have lots of tools. I'm a bit of a tool geek. So I have been personally trying to increase the number of tools that I have, because I want to have that material capital so that then I can do other experiential things. And we'll get to experiential capital in just a minute here. Financial capital is just as it sounds. It's any stocks, bonds, gold bullion that you have, any way that you can trade with the paper money that we all believe in. Then living capital is anything that's alive. So if you have a yard, your trees are a form of living capital. The soil that you have is a form of living capital. Anything that anything that is alive where you are living is a form of living capital. Typically, people who have more land have more living capital, but if that land is an agricultural field that has been sprayed for decades, your living capital probably isn't so living anymore. But that can be changed. There are various tools and techniques you can use to improve the quality of the soil. Intellectual capital, the things that you've learned. So if you have certifications or degrees, or you've done a lot of book reading, this is intellectual capital, the things that you know that you keep in your head, or even that you might share. That's why intellectual capital or intellectual property is in quotation marks, because people will copyright their intellectual property because it is a form of their wealth. Experiential capital are the things that we do. So traveling, I know Dan has done a lot of traveling, spent a lot of time in Spain. He has a lot of experiential capital. So going places, doing things, seeing things, this is our experiential capital. And there are some people who have a lot of that and then can share that with the world if they so choose. Our spiritual capital is how we interact with the world on an interpersonal spiritual level. And I love the fact that in my studies, I was reading about the ancient Mayans, and they had a belief that, and we think about the ancient Mayans and the Incas as bloodthirsty and, performing heart removal and all that sort of stuff. But they did have a flip side to their belief system. And that was that just by being born, your main duty in life is to create beauty. And I think, oh, wow, that is just so heartwarming to hear, is that is what we should be creating in the world, is beauty. And by capturing that concept, we can bring that into the world, and we can cultivate more spiritual capital. And then our cultural capital. So out of everything that we've just discussed, everything is individual. I can have social capital. I can have material capital. I can have financial or living or intellectual or experiential or spiritual capital. Cultural capital is the one form of currency that is shared amongst all of us. If I happen to start singing, the itsy bitsy spider went up the water spout, you guys would start singing, down came the rain and washed the spider out, right? Because you know that song. That's part of our cultural capital. Artwork that is well known. Think of Picasso, Van Gogh, Monet. This is part of our cultural capital. This is something that is shared amongst all of us, that makes all of us more rich, makes us appreciate beauty more. There are things that we share amongst each other. And that's what makes our culture rich. So to implement permaculture, what we do is we take the 3 ethics, which are at our very core, we apply the principles to that, and then we look at the flower. We add our forms of capital. So how I am, who I am, is different than how Carol is different than Lais is different how Mike is. We're all individuals in that, we have different preferences. Carol is really very much into spiritual well-being, and Kathy is very much so into the finances and economics. That's definitely her background. So we each have these strengths on the petal, and then we can apply our forms of capital to that. So Kathy is also really great and has a lot of social capital built up. And how can she apply that is how she gives her gift to the world. My personal flower petal that I lean most towards is land and nature stewardship. But I've also done education and culture. I love teaching. So those are my 2 petals that I love to put my energy toward. And my specific type of capital, definitely not financial capital, but I would say I probably have some intellectual capital, a little bit of experiential capital, and those are my gifts to the world. This is how we can apply what we're passionate about with the forms of capital that we have, and to give the gift of a better world to our next generations. So like I had mentioned earlier, I do not have access to a clock. I have no idea where we're at time-wise. Kathy, can you give me a verbal cue where we're at?
Perfect timing. It's exactly 1 hour to the minute.
Amazing. That's
Yes.
fabulous. So
You're a
I
professional.
hope I didn't bore anybody to tears. I know what we wanted to do next was to offer breakout rooms. Dan has a wealth of knowledge about.
Be okay maybe with seeing if there are general questions before we do that.
Oh, that's right. Were there chats in the chat box?
You know, I forgot to tell people, hey, put your questions in chat. So
That's
why don't we
okay.
just give it a moment and see if anybody, we're a small enough group, I think you could probably just unmute, or you can raise your hand if you
Unmute,
want.
maybe we'll do like 5 to 10 minutes of a Q&A session, and then we can do our breakout rooms. I do want to honor the fact that we said that this program would be an hour long, and we're on that time frame. So if you do need to go, I want to say thank you so much for being here. We will be planning more activities through Meetup, also with the help of SARE. Lais, thank you so very much for offering this platform to us. If you do need to go, our feelings won't be hurt, but we do hope you join us another time. So if you need to say farewell, you can say bye in the chat room and hope to catch you another time. Otherwise, stay on with us and let's chat.
If I could put in a plug too, I'm going to be kind of planning these programs. So if there's anybody out there that's hearing this and they think, hey, I would love to, be one of the presenters. If you've got a topic that falls in any realm of what we've just discussed as permaculture, please message me. I'll put my email is on the website for the program. And I do want to say that Dan has agreed to work with me on some books that we're going to be talking about. And the first one we've chosen is Gaia's Garden. This is what it looks like. The subtitle is Guide to Home-Scale Permaculture. And we thought we would start with that just because, there might be some people out there that do have 20 acres, but we can start small and then we can kind of go from there. But if you've got a favorite book that you really like, we'd love to hear about that as well. We're thinking we might be talking about sheet mulching and soil building at some point in the not too distant future, because again, that's something almost everybody can do. And next month, we don't have the date quite figured out yet, but our own Christine that we just heard from is going to be a panelist, and several other people that are friends of Northwest Indiana permaculture and some new people as well are going to have videos shown of their permaculture landscape. And so I think that's going to be really fun. So watch our space for an invitation to that. Let's see, did I get a question in chat? Mary said, thank you. That was so interesting. Thank you for being here, Mary. I gave Mary some composting worms last year, so that was exciting. I know she's on the composting bandwagon. But okay, well, not seeing any questions in chat. I just want to echo what Christine said. Thank you for being here with us. Do not feel obligated to stick around, but if you're curious about anything and you'd enjoy getting into a breakout room with 2-3 people and talk about something that you're passionate in. Christine, what was your topic that you wanted to kind of talk about? And you just were saying something about Dan as well.
I was offering to do a breakout session if anyone had design questions specific to their backyard or their community. I'm happy to talk design. And
until Dan unmutes, if he wants to unmute, I'll just say, Christine is absolutely right. She's got my number. I love connecting people. So I could definitely talk to anybody if they're looking for somebody who knows how to do something in particular. I may be able to connect you. I can also talk about time banking. That's one of my passions, because time banking is a way where I don't have to insert myself into every transaction. I just get people into the time bank. And then not only can they share time, but they can share some permaculture plants that sometimes can be hard to come by, like comfrey is one that Christine talked about. I grow comfrey. I have plenty of comfrey. I have Jerusalem artichokes. We cannot sell them to one another, but just make them available for time credit. So lots of different ways that we can interact. Looks like a couple of people are having to go, yes, Lais.
Can I share something also?
Of course.
Awesome. So SARE, can I share about SARE and what we do?
Of course. Yes, that would be fantastic.
So SARE is actually a USDA organization that was created with the Farm Bill in 1988 in order for farmers to push sustainability in agriculture, because farmers, obviously, we're the trending people. We're in the land. And so SARE is every 2 years in Indiana, I basically run the grant that basically helps people like me. I'm also an agriculture and natural resources educator, extension educator in Hancock County down by Indianapolis. And more educators are becoming more familiar with permaculture and sustainability. And that's our whole, that's what SARE wants to do, is train educators so we can help our stakeholders. But also what SARE does is every year there's 6 different grant opportunities that it's competitive grants that people can try for. And one is a farmer rancher grant for $15,000. And that comes out in August, and farmers are doing education and research on their farm. Depending on what you want to do, you can do education or research. And you can find that information on the SARE website. It's NCR, it stands for North Central Region, SARE, SARE. And I'm happy to talk about grants anytime. In fact, I just talked to a lady today who's out in Park County. She's gotten a grant to try to raise truffles on her farm. And she had gone to Italy and learned about truffles. Anyways, I'm excited, and it's fun to talk to people who, especially farmers who are pushing the envelope on sustainability, and especially in Indiana. It's really neat. So I wanted to share that with you. I'm happy to talk about that if we wanted to chat.
Thank you so much, and especially for those people who do have 20, 40, 80 plus acres. The more people who can look into these kind of grants and make large scale improvements. That's exciting for our whole state to. And
it can be backyard growers too. So.
Oh, all right. Hey,
urban growers, we're very into urban growers. Yes, we don't want to discriminate.
Good to know. And I think you have a smaller grant too that's about events. That was one that Charlotte Wolf had asked me to look into. Do you want to say a little bit about that?
Yes, that's a rolling one right now. I think the next one goes out in March, and it is SARE is trying to find people who are wanting to have events and reimburse them for, I don't remember, I think it's up to $2,000. I believe that is also competitive, but it's a really easy form to try. So that's how Kathy and I got to meet. So that was perfect.
Good, good, good. Well, we hope that this will catch a spark with somebody who has a great idea for an event, and that we can just cast this wide net of education and recording the stuff. People can see it even if they weren't lucky enough to be here with us tonight. But Christine, you do have a question or two in chat. So Maureen has asked, are there any real issues with planting stuff over septic fields? And if it doesn't look like we have a ton of questions, so do we want to just handle that here in the main area?
Sure. I'm not sure who else is still on the call with us. It looks like it's just Dan, Elise, and Carol. Who else is on with us still?
I actually have the same question. So I would
Oh,
like
about
to know that
septic?
too. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm going to be totally honest, and I don't have a whole lot of experience with septic. Is it just the 6 of us right now?
I believe so.
Okay. So on the property that Tom just bought, we do have septic out there as well. But it also has a gray water system installed that we are trying to figure out where the lines run through it. We know kind of where it runs. But as far as planting anything on it, I'm not sure, Mike and Maureen, if you have a way that you can divert any of your gray water so that, or even your black water, if you wanted to start Humanure composting. Dan and I both have done that in the past, and that's a really great way to divert your urine and put that directly on the garden. It does need to be diluted 10 parts of water to 1 part urine, but then it can be put directly on all of your vegetable crops. The poop part of it does need to be composted for a full year. And there's a good book called The Humanure Handbook by Joseph Jenkins that you can read. It's actually in its 4th edition, which is really astounding because every time he puts out a new edition, he's done more scientific research to support the health factors and the sanitation of composting your poop. So it's a great book, and he has a whole section in there about septic systems. And I have read it, but I don't want to try to claim that I fully understand it, because septic systems, having grown up in the suburbs, I never had to deal with that, but
That's
I
good.
have been doing Humanure composting since 2016. So, you know, my 5-bay compost system in the backyard, every single one of those has had Humanure added to it. It's been harvested from, it's all gone out into my gardens. I have never had any issues with it. It doesn't totally answer your question about what to plant over a septic system. And I'm not sure I want to delve into that too much, just because
I think Lais had her hand up. Did you have some answer for us?
Yes, I feel very strongly about septic systems. I kind of love them. And so I love to talk about them. So what I do know, don't plant a willow tree by your septic system. It will ruin your septic system.
Right.
It will ruin it. It will mess it up really bad. Some native plants even have such deep roots that they're not suggested. But if you want to put a native garden, look on the SICM website. Have you looked at the SICM website? It stands for Southern Indiana Cooperative Invasive Management. And they also have a lot of native plant nurseries on there. They're not Southern Indiana anymore. They're becoming all statewide. So they're very helpful. So don't feel like it won't apply to you. But they have some ideas about septic plantings. But yes, you do have to be very careful to take care of your septic system. And you have to be careful about what you plant. And also, Christine, that Humanure stuff is so cool. I love that too. Can you tell I love waste that's not really
Yes.
waste? It's not
Yes.
waste, obviously, but so anyway,
Absolutely.
I
Yeah,
could talk
well,
about
that's-
this forever. I could talk about this forever.
Oh, I could too. And that's why I love that 6th permaculture principle of produce no waste, is because when we're totally connected to our natural systems, even our own poop is not waste anymore. Now it's a nutrient, it's a resource. And I hate using public toilets or flushing my pee down the drains, because, you know, it goes through a whole cleansing system. And a lot of times it ends up in the landfill, and then you are not part of that closed loop system.
Yeah,
So,
but septics are kind of a closed loop. That's why I think they're so cool, because you're feeding the microbes. And you know where the microbes come from is from our own bodies. That's what's so cool about it. I mean, I just think it, and they're very ancient. But yes, I agree. I love Humanure, but when we can't have that, septics are pretty nice.
yeah.
Septics, the depth on septic systems is 18 to 36 inches. So like on ours, on one end of the field, it's 18 inches. The other end, it's 36 inches. So you wouldn't want any plant that's going to extend roots deeper than what your septic system is.
So my question is, though, you know, are we talking about the really big roots? Because they talk about how plants have such very fine philia beyond what would be the visible root. How much of that do we have to worry about for a septic system?
So do you have grass over it right now, Maureen? What kind of plants do you want to plant over it?
Well, it started out,
You've got grass.
yeah, we've
vegetable
had
bed.
grass. Initially, we had like a wildflower, you know, like the generic wildflower thing that died,
meadow.
but meadow. But then it was grass. For a while we had grapevines in between the rows, and we pulled those out. So now we have pine trees at the far east edge, and I don't know how much their roots is getting into the septic field. And then working our way west over the septic field, I now have rhubarb and asparagus and raspberries planted over part of the septic area. And I was like, I'm wondering, how much can I put in native plants? How much can I put in perennial food? You know, it's like turf grass,
So
3 inches roots, okay, but you know, I don't want all turf grass.
okay, so do you have a small amount of space that you're dealing with, or you just don't like grass?
Well, we're trying to reduce the amount of grass.
Yeah, we'd rather not have grass and have something more useful.
Yes, the hard part is septics are kind of engineered to have grass. You know what I mean? So that's the hard part, because septics are an engineered. So I would be afraid to do too much planting, that you're going to be over there too much and messing with it too much. So that's the only fear, because septics are sensitive. So that's all I can say. I'd have to kind of know more about how you're handling it, because grass is kind of what it's engineered for. So,
Turf grass, not deep rooted grass.
correct, it's turf grass. Yes, that's what I'm
So we
talking.
can't go with big blue stem over.
No,
the-
no,
No.
yeah.
Yeah,
Not unless you,
most of your native plants are going to have roots that are way too deep.
yeah.
So how do you make use of a septic field?
I feel like it's being useful to deal with your waste. I feel like it already is having good use, but it's kind of what you feel like.
Well, so all the waste is coming through the septic field, that's feeding the turf grass.
It's feeding the microbes under the ground. Yep.
Yeah. But that's feeding turf grass.
Right.
I
I
want
know.
something, I want something better than turf grass. So how do I do that?
Well, Humanure would be great. If
Well,
you know,
isn't that what's going into the septic field?
no,
Yeah.
Humanure, well, yes,
Oh,
I mean, but
kind
it's
of.
different. It's different. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it depends on your goals, but I like a septic system because it's doing the job for me, but it is more work to take care of your Humanure. But if that's what you want to do, totally do it.
Maureen, can I ask, in you're part of incorporated Chesterton, right? You're not unincorporated?
Correct.
Okay, so you're required to have septic?
Or sewer.
We could spend thousands of dollars to hook up, many thousands of dollars to hook up to sewer. Because right now, the closest line is the high flow sewer, so it would be a long reach for us to,
No, it's just out the corner.
no, it's, well, anyway. When we built it, the only option was septic.
Yeah. I would think that some shallow rooted annual natives might be a good option. So those are plants that just produce seeds every year and they don't develop a strong root system. So like your wild senna is one that it's a short-lived perennial, but you know, think of like smaller native plants. Maybe lupin might do okay there, but something that's not going to be deep rooted and affect the septic in that way. We'll do some
So-
research together about that.
So like annual vegetables would be okay then.
Yeah, because they're pretty shallow
You
rooted.
throw
And
lettuce and stuff like that on top, right?
of course, yeah, that would be a good option for sure. Yeah,
Okay,
I don't know how comfortable you would be doing like radishes on there, but they're super shallow rooted.
Yeah. So
yeah.
basically any of our annual vegetable garden would be fine. Is that
Yeah,
right?
and annual vegetables or annual native wildflowers would be good. Yeah.
Okay.
I have to ask a question. Is there any problem with like hygiene? I mean, once it's out, your waste is out in the septic field and the microbes are breaking it down. Is there any problem with like planting food you're going to eat so close to septic?
No. Because the microbes are breaking it down, and especially because Mike and Maureen are already healthy. They don't have to worry about pathogens being in the poop and then therefore getting into the soil. Typically, you would only have to worry about that if you had a sick community or if there was a cholera outbreak or something like that that was affecting the community in general, where you might have wastewater like running down the roads or something. But that doesn't happen here. And because Mike and Maureen are already healthy and their system is pretty self-contained, they shouldn't have any problems with pathogens in the soil, and the food will be safe.
Cool.
Yeah.
If you're talking about Humanure, and you say, you know, you like 10-to-1 water to human waste, you know, septic system provides that plus, you know, based on
The
water
The
that's
10-to-1 was
going.
the 10-to-1 ratio was specifically for urine. So if you're collecting urine separate from the poop, then you can take that urine and dilute it 10 parts water to 1 part urine. But
Yeah.
you would not want to take poop and water that down and put that directly on your plants, because then you could potentially have an issue. So you do want it to fully compost in a compost bin or a pile for a year.
But the septic tank is basically doing that too, right?
Yeah, which is why then your septic field is safe to grow your vegetable crops on.
Okay.
I'm curious if Elise has any questions. She's been awfully quiet, or Carol. Dan, you've been pretty quiet too. Elise, do you have anything to say?
Hang on. I have a somewhat different septic system in that it's what is it called? It's partially aerobic and anaerobic. And so I'm just forgetting the name of the system right this moment. But I know I have to be careful as to not having heavy animals on it or driving over it, because it's got a pipe system that can collapse. So I'm sort of kind of happy that it's just grass, because I don't want to have to deal with, walking over it a lot, or potentially damaging it unnecessarily. So, but it's a different system to what Mike and Maureen would have. That's all.
Can I just say, I had a thought pop into my head about the septic area, Maureen, is that one thing that you could grow on there, being shallow rooted, would be grains. And then if you wanted to, those grains could feed the chickens.
It's a good idea.
Just a thought.
Mhm.
Dan,
Oh.
have you ever had any problems with your Humanure composting system?
I can't imagine what type of problem you would be thinking of.
I don't know, just anything. I was just, because I haven't, but I know everybody seems very squeamish about it, doing Humanure composting. But I've been doing it since 2016 and I've never really had any issues, except for like running out of brown material to add to it. I think that might be that might be the only problem I have, is just sourcing enough materials to balance the nitrogen.
I started composting my manure just because I was thinking I need a source for more nitrogen material for my compost. I wish I knew somebody who had a large mammal that I could get their manure. And then it dawned on me, wait a minute, I know a large mammal that poops a lot. And so I started composting, but I put a lot of, like a lot of duff on it when it's in the bucket. So, I mean, there's already quite a bit of carbon material mixed in with it. And then usually in the fall, I have like a bin that I'll just throw exclusively dried leaves in the fall. And over the course of the next year, they pretty much, they don't compost very much. And I will, every time I dump my poop bucket, I will cover it with the leaves from one of the bins. So I haven't really, I haven't really had a problem, and it seems like I feel like I've made some really good compost.
I would love to do just an entire workshop on Humanure composting. I don't know how many people would join us though. But
I'm in. I'm all in. Well, you know what? Follow the money. You said that the economics and the financial thing was my angle. And I want to tell you, the city of Milwaukee, those citizens do not get a bill for their waste. They actually get a check, because Milorganite is made in Milwaukee, which is from Humanure. I mean, who's heard of Milorganite, the fertilizer? Why doesn't every municipality do that? I don't know. Yeah, we need to get this, like, show me the money.
Heck yeah.
All right. Well, anyway, I'm glad there is a forum where this can be talked about. I don't know. This is a little wacky that we've kind of come into this. And just a reminder, this is being recorded, so hopefully everybody's fine with this topic. But this, I think, was a really successful first event. And I look forward to, putting on some more events and hopefully even getting a wider audience where we can, broaden the conversation. I know we're coming up on 1/2 the hour. Is there anything anybody's sitting with that they'd like to share before we close out our time together? Okay.
I want to thank Christine for an awesome primer. I've watched almost all of them, I think. But this
I think
one
you have.
definitely the best. Congratulations.
Well, I couldn't have done it without you, Elise. So thank you for all of your support through the years from that very first permaculture primer we did at Fluid Coffee Bar back in 2017. So you
I was-
have definitely been the my strong spot through all of this. So thank you.
I was at that one too, and she's right.
Yeah.
They just keep getting better. Well, thanks again. Yes, thanks, Christine. Thanks everybody for your part in this. And we'll do this again next month. It might be Rebecca's event that we, do together, to be continued. But watch the space, NWImeetup.com, or NWI Permaculture Meetup. Anyway, it's late. I think at that, we should probably go ahead and close it out. But you can email me, kasimple@gmail.com, if you have questions, if you want to join the time bank, if you want to be a speaker at an upcoming program, if you have any questions about any of this, I'm happy to be the main contact and get back to you. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Kathy, for organizing this. And thank you, ladies, for providing the platform for us.
Thanks for
We
having
appreciate
me. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good night,
Bye.
everyone.
Good night.
Bye-bye.